Well, a few weeks ago we started exploring the mini-based utilities. But of course, there are many mini-based utilities. So we thought we'd come back and do a few more, starting with the Foers Nomad. This video is about the Nomad, which is my personal favourite, I have to admit, of all of them, largely because visually as well as in construction, it really does fit the Mini Land Rover bill perfectly. Underneath the alloy body panels lies a multitubular chassis which was heavily rust proofed and rust treated before the body panels went on. In fact, it is said, although I'm not entirely sure, having not had a close look at a chassis, that John Foers, who designed the car and a very talented engineer in his own right, decided to use U-section steel rather than box section, rather like the Triumph Herald, which allowed him to reach all the nooks and crannies and treat every single surface of the chassis with the rust protection. And this is borne out by the fact that of all the mini-based utilities, you can probably see quite a few Nomads still around, not least even if they I remember one in a back garden in Bangor-on-Dee in North Wales. It's probably still there now with a tree growing out of the middle of it. I mean, it broke my heart, but the owner was adamant that one day he would get it back on the road, and it you know, just a testimony for how tough these things were. But let's go back to the beginning and look at the Foers Nomad. Foers, of course, referring to John Foers, the designer and engineer who created the models, and he had quite a rich engineering history behind him when he decided to, you know, start making cars. And this was pretty much a part-time project to start with in 1975, and initially the cars weren't sold as kits at all. They were all sold as turnkey cars and by word of mouth, and they found a lot of popularity amongst the local farming community, John being based in South Yorkshire. In fact, when he eventually did set up Foers Engineering, it was in Rotherham in South Yorkshire, and as well as the Nomad, he initially started producing a rather successful range of trailers as well, which complemented the car. And it was only towards the end of the 70s that he went all in and full time producing the Nomad kit alongside the trailers. Now the story really starts getting attention from all the national kit car mags and the local press, and the car has started to build up sales. But the story really gets interesting around 1981 when the Duke of Hamilton discovers the car and is very enthusiastic and gets involved with the business with John Foers, and he sees this as an opportunity to produce cars in Argyll in Scotland and create local jobs. Now this was probably the boom period for the business. The grille got an update with some slatted grills rather than the more basic original version, and variations included a pickup, which was useful for the farming community. There was a van version, which in itself was again useful for the farming and small business community, and an estate version, which was seen as sort of the family option, but with the seats folded down, you still got a square meter of load space in the back of the car. So it really was a utilitarian vehicle that was extremely useful and popular, and it became you know, a bit of a cult amongst the owners of the cars. Became quite ardent in their support for the marque and the cars themselves. Now, an interesting story that I was told was that of Hamilton and John were scratching their heads over the hardtop of the saloon estate van version, and the reason why it looks like a Land Rover in miniature is because the roof of the hardtop was actually a mould taken from a Land Rover. Then it was cut and shut to fit the Nomad, and hey presto, you really did have a mini Land Rover roof on the mini Land Rover Nomad. And it's one of the more distinctive features of the car in its own right, which is, adds to the reason why it's so endearing. Now, John and the Duke didn't sit on their haunches and rely purely on the Nomad. Developments carried on apace, and in 1983, I think it was, they developed a metro-based sister model. It wasn't a replacement because the Nomad carried on in production, but the sister model was called the Triton, and this was seen as, if you like, the more suburbanized version of the Nomad. It had slightly less aggressive styling. It had mini metro donor, which meant that it had the hydrogas suspension, which meant that it had a slightly softer ride, which was the only real criticism you could make of the mini based Nomad, because it really was, a bit bouncy inside that. But the Triton tried to address this. It was a longer wheelbase. It was seen as a softer version, if you like, a more mature version. And unfortunately, amongst the Nomad aficionados or Foers aficionados, the Triton's been looked down on somewhat, but I rather like them. And I remember when I was working as a volunteer on the Talyllyn Railway in the mid-80s, one of the volunteers, I never did work out who it was, had a Foers Nomad, and they were very happy with it. It was always there every summer. It was perfect for railway life, being, like I said, the mini Land Rover, and everyone stopped and had a look at it. It was quite an unusual car to see around, and that was again one of the appeals of these cars. But the developments didn't stop there. The company took a giant leap into the off-road extremes by producing the Ibex. Now, the Ibex in itself is worthy of a story because it's still in production today, and in itself there's quite a history. Not least the Duke of taking the prototype and doing some record runs with the car. But the Ibex was basically moved really right over to Land Rover Defender components, and it was the Land Rover Plus. It had much sharper approach and departure angles. It was much more utilitarian even than the Land Rover donor car, and it was basically seen as the extreme off-roader option. It was, when your Land Rover couldn't quite go there, you bought yourself a Foers Ibex. And Ibex are still in production now with John Foers' son at the helm, and very successful they are too. In fact, with all the hype going on around the Ineos Grenadier, it's easy to forget that there is another utilitarian British built 4x4 and sometimes 6x4 model which is extremely successful in its own right. And as I said, that is a story in its own right. I'm not sure if it counts as a kit car anymore because most of them have been turnkey, but then it's going back to the roots because the original Nomads, as I said, were all produced as turnkey cars. It was only later on that John started selling them as a kit. And the Foers Nomad and the Foers company. Now the Ibex, by the way, is back in South Yorkshire, so everything's come back full circle. So thank you for taking the time to listen. If you've enjoyed the video, please click on like. It does help us with the algorithm. Steve and I are not exactly sure how it works, but all the experts say that it really does help both channels. Please subscribe to both channels, Enwins Motors and TKC Magazine's YouTube channel, because it really does help us to produce these videos for you, and also it helps generate awareness of what we're doing and allows us to keep going. And as well as that, please share this link, tell your friends about it, draw more people in, and you'll be doing us a real service. Really, we're both sort of drawing up lists now of cars that we both want to do the history of, and hope you enjoy them, and we certainly enjoy doing them, so I look forward to seeing you with the next one. The Anderson Cub can definitely be regarded as a success story in the mini utility market, not least because it was visually probably the closest in looks to the original Mini Moke. The Anderson Cub Kitcar was offered by Liverpool-based company from 1985 to 2003, and then again from 2011 to 2020, both times under the same management and with about 450 units produced in total. It was sold as both kits and complete cars, available in 2- and 4-seat variants with 4- and 6-wheel configurations, all based on the classic Mini mechanicals and styled very much after the iconic Mini Moke. The Anderson Motor Company was founded in Liverpool in the UK by brothers Charles and David Anderson in 1985. The Cub, their one and only model, was a steel-framed microcar or utility kit inspired by the Mini Moke. It featured Mini-derived suspension, brakes and running gear, and could be outfitted with the engines from the Mini, Mini Metro or Austin Allegro, often featuring the 1275 or, as sometimes described, the 1300 unit. Alongside the standard 2- and 4-seat models, there was also a rare 6-wheeled version, the Cub 6. This would seat up to 6 to 7 people and featured a hefty roll bar for additional safety. It was first produced from 1985 until 2003, which was a successful run in its own right. It was also noted for having passed the German TUV, and also it managed to pass the SVA and later IVA. It was later revived by, again, the Anderson Motor Company from 2011 to 2020. So 450 cars were produced between the two production periods, but it was definitely a success, and it basically carried on quietly turning out the cars from their Bootle base in Merseyside. It was intended as a lightweight, fun summer vehicle with a box steel chassis for durability and the option of soft or hard top roof option. It was also unusual, especially from 2012, that when it was returned, it was offered as a body kit, partly knocked down kit with all the components available, or fully assembled with IVA compliant. It was notable when the car returned in 2012 that it was available either as a body kit, partly knocked down kit, which is basically having a little work for the home assembler and all the components available, or fully assembled, having passed all the IVA compliancy requirements for the UK individual vehicle approval testing. Various price tiers were available, and in short, the Cub was successful both in the UK and in export markets. Upon its return, the company made this wonderful announcement. The Anderson Cub is available again from its original builder, Charles Anderson. According to Anderson, the car can now be bought as a complete ready-to-drive car or in kit form for home assembly, using all new parts and engine gearbox units supplied, rebuilt to as new condition by the Anderson Motor Company. The new Cub is fully IVA compliant and as such, if built by AMC, can be supplied with a 2012 registration number. Body shells come with roll bars and crash bars front and rear, plus altered suspension arms at the rear, steering column, handbrake lever and pedal assembly bracket in order to comply with the new rules. When supplied as a complete vehicle, it comes with 6 months UK road tax. Prices depend upon final specification, but there were 3 steps available. Number 1, body kit for use with a mini donor vehicle. Price ex works from £3,980. The partly knocked down unit with all parts supplied ex works from £8,975. The complete 2-seat drive-away example is priced ex works from £11,695. Charles writes, "It is promised that you will never tire of the smiles, waves and toots. Life is too short to drive a boring car. That's why we build the Cub." It was a very welcome return and very unusual for a company to close its doors and then re-emerge years later. But the Cub can definitely be called a success story because it managed to re-emerge and re-emerge with the option of the fully built car. As can be seen from the photo, even the basic knockdown kit for requiring a mini donor came with quite a decent spec. There was plenty of components, pretty well everything that you would need to build the car. And as you can see from the photo, it made for quite an impressive specification in terms of everything was there for the builder. They really did think of everything. The Anderson Cub has, in the kit car industry, a very good feeling about it. I never heard a bad word about the company. It was well run, customers were well looked after, and the product was of good quality. All these things added up. Later being offered as with the option of a fully built car, again created a new market. And within the kit car circles, you'd have to call this definitely one of those successes that defies the ages and really stands aside as one of the great kit car stories. And of course, from my perspective, it was also quite a local manufacturer, which again, in these areas, it would have created vital jobs. But the brothers were well known for being friendly, helpful and supportive, and that was a big deal, and obviously helped to create the good reputation that they enjoyed throughout the car's production life. Another early attempt at creating a replacement for the Moke in the kit car industry was the Jiminy. And here's that story. The original design for the Jiminy and the Mark I red car here dates back 51 years to 1974. So it's definitely one of the earliest Moke-esque mini-based utilities. And you can see how the styling was influenced by the BMC Classic. However, there have been sizable gaps in its history, especially in the lean periods of the 1970s. The Mark I Jiminy was created by Dave Cameron and Ron Peeling, based in Sunbury-on-Thames. Cameron was an interesting fellow. At the time of the Jiminy's launch, he was working as a film location catering operator. He later was the landlord at Ye Olde King's Head in Shepperton. Well over 300 examples of the steel-bodied Mark I were sold. In 1976, a new GRP sloping front end arrived. The project subsequently and quickly passed through several hands, including a Tooting Steel Company and another operation in Brighton. The project ceased for 4 years, and it might well have slipped into obscurity. However, it returned in 1981 under JA Developments. It was they who began work on the revised Jiminy Mark II, with much fanfare, as I recall, in the Kitcar press at the time, although again it moved around several companies before going out of production again until being acquired by Ken and Carl Coombs in 1990. Again, very little happened until the Scamp Motor Company under Alistair McLean bought the project in 1993, producing a batch of 40 Jiminy 2s for a hire company in Trinidad before promptly shelving it again. At the time, their core Scamp models were selling very well, and there was a steady flow of Scamp owners requiring spares on top of that. All remained quiet on the Jiminy front until late 1993, when a gentleman called Kieran Marsh took the project on. He revised the kit and sold a few more before he too ceased trading. The yellow car in the picture was Kieran's demo car, and a total of 60 Jiminy 2s may well have found homes. Styling, of course, is subjective, but from my own conversations with enthusiasts and press coverage at the time, the Jiminy was always regarded as an attractive and high-quality product. It certainly showed enough promise for several attempts to revive the project, which sadly never lasted long. Rumours persist that there may well be another attempt yet to surface, but the requirements of IVA would mean significant development work would be required, not to mention the fact that the Mini is now long out of production, even though the components are still readily available. So for now we have to file the Jiminy under the file of a well-regarded and well-designed member of the mini utility kit market that tried valiantly to find a revival to no avail. The Gecko was distinctively styled, had a certain charm to it. I certainly liked it. Here's the story of that. Now, let's go back to the time. It was the early 80s, from about the 1970s, early 1970s. After the Moke had gone out of production, the Kitcar industry kind of stepped in. I think one of the earliest and still the most famous is the Scamp, for example. But by the mid-80s, there was quite a few of these cars, and it made a lot of sense because it was a car that the family could use. It had cheap running gear. It was also fun, and it brought back the spirit of the Moke, which was still popular in people's memories from the 60s, and The Prisoner, and series like that were still being repeated on TV. Now, the Gecko, for me, always stuck in my mind for various reasons. It was never a huge seller, but what set it apart for me is, although you couldn't call it beautiful, it certainly looked professionally styled, and it definitely looked different to some of the other Moke-type vehicles, and I rather liked it. Now, the design was by a gentleman called David Simmons, and Autobarn, his company, operated in Altrincham in Cheshire. The GRP was done by Ingram's, which is one of the best GRP companies in the industry at the time. They did cars, like their own car was the Domino Pimlico, which is absolutely fantastic, definitely worth another story. But coming back to the Gecko, there wasn't a huge amount of GRP, to be fair. It was basically the bonnet was the GRP. Mini subframes, front and rear, a very sturdy steel frame, and the Ingram bonnet on top. And it's a short little feature, this, and on a short little car. It was exactly the kind of rugged thing you'd expect from a Moke-type vehicle, and quite capable by all accounts, and still a few of them knocking around with very proud owners. And I'd love to hear from someone who'd be willing to let us go and do a feature on it. But anyway, the Autobarn Gecko, produced in Altrincham, David Simmons the designer, Ingram's did the GRP for the bonnet. Very simple, practical. It was of its era, and I think, would it still work today? Why don't you leave us a comment? And also, by all means, give us a suggestion of one of the cars you'd like to see. And if you've enjoyed this video, short though it is, why don't you click on the thumbs up, let people know that there's something interesting here, and why don't you hit the bell and subscribe and hit on all whilst you're at it, because then you'll be informed when a new video lands. And if this little series proves popular, we're obviously going to keep doing them.
Delighted this time. A gentleman who I had, a late gentleman I have to say, sadly, who I knew, did a few features with him back in the day, always got on very well, and he really was a gentleman and a gifted, go so far as to say a proper genius. And the name of that person is William Towns. I think from memory we've got quite a few videos on now, and they don't always necessarily follow, a bit like Eric Morecambe. They're all the right notes, not necessarily in the right order. They don't actually come out in the order that we record them. So I've learnt to my cost not to say, oh yeah, the one before this one, because people say, hang on a minute, that's not that one. So I don't even bother now. So I think I'm right in saying this is the first week. I promised some on great designers that touched our industry. I think, I could be wrong, unbelievably it has been known, that we've not done a designer before. So this is a great pleasure that William is the first one. Incidentally, it was always William, never Bill. Some of these classic car journalist types think they were clever and they knew him and they didn't, and they called him and they refer to him as Bill Towns. All no, verboten, absolutely verboten. That was his charming wife Elizabeth would always rebuke a transgressor on that front. Actually, talking about some of those classic car journos are okay. They don't just look down at us kit car types with disdain anymore, which I could never understand anyway. But anyway, there you go. So let's move swiftly on. William he set up William Towns Limited in 1977. and he traded under the name of Interstyle. That is Inter, STYL. But let's go wind it right way back, and we'll come to all that. He was born in 1936, and his family were well into their cars. His father had a Jaguar SS 100, I think, and his mother an MGTD. And in fact, one of young William's first cars was a Rolls Royce. I know not which model, but it was certainly a Rolls Royce. He went to work for the Roots Group in 1954, where he told me that he largely worked on seat and door handle designs. He had to cut his teeth somewhere. He actually did mention a list of cars that had his door handles on, which made me chuckle. He did actually have a big list as well, but I can't find any of those notes. I mean, we are talking nearly 40 years ago, so perhaps I could be forgiven for that. It's irritating because I like intimate details on these companies and designers and such like, and people, and it annoys me when I can't find those last little bits that I need. One of his colleagues, actually, when he worked at Roots, he was working on the Hillman Hunter, where one of his colleagues was another hugely talented car designer, and one that's touched our game, and that was Professor Tony Stevens, another gifted gentleman as well. We move on to he moved on to Rover in 1963, where one of his biggest successes, I guess, was designing the body for the Rover BRM gas turbine project that was headed up by David Bash. And that car raced at Le Mans in 1965. And then in the following year, 66, William joined Aston Martin, primarily again on seat design, but his rise was pretty meteoric there. And he famously designed the DB, had input, definitely major input on the DBS, and input on the Vantage V8, and he certainly designed the first edition of the Lagonda. And that car really was I suppose now would be regarded as a trendsetter. And certainly for Williams' type of design, which he liked to call razor edge. If you look at his designs, he did like a sharp angle, and certainly Lagonda set the tone for that, for what came after, really. And indeed, William, I keep trying to say Richard, I don't know why. William was always partial to a gadget, and it's no surprise that Lagonda had wild computerized digi, put teeth in Steve, digi-dash arrangement that for its time was really futuristic. Ultimately, I don't think it worked very well, but it was futuristic. I think it was really the fact that I think Williams' design was perfectly good, but I think the engineers couldn't really get it to work successfully, I don't think, for whatever reason. And as I mentioned earlier, he set up his own company, Interstyle, in 1977, just to enable him to do his own thing, really. Other things that came up back then were obviously the GS Europa was a project that he worked with Mike Rawlings on, and GS Cars in Bristol, who really commissioned that car or funded it for sure. I remember the first time I visited William's house, the Park Farm Estate in Compton Vernay in Warwickshire. I think it was 1984, and I was only 22 then. I found it a revelation. I mean, I was a council house boy, and to go to a house like that, it was something else. I didn't know anyone who lived in such a house, actually. And maybe I still don't, but definitely at that time, it was a beautiful property. It appeared to me as a South Londoner, it was like a stately home. Anyway, Elizabeth was a superb hostess, and it was truly, I say, truly amazing. There was William had two studios downstairs where he created his designs, and I think they were distinct from each other, so he didn't just go into the one he fancied. I think one was used for one particular project, and the other one on another, or for another company who doing commissions for. I think one of them was for his own designs, and the other one was for the commissions that he received. And they actually poured in quite a lot on regularly. And it wasn't just on cars either, and we'll come to that. I remember my dear old mate Pete Coxhead, the late Pete Coxhead. We were sitting in his study once, and William suddenly became very distracted, and he rushed to his bifold doors that looked out over his beautiful estate, with a lake at the bottom of that estate, sort of towards the end, past a field and some, well, beautiful landscaping there. He grabbed a pair of binoculars and he had mounted on a tripod in front of his large bay, those windows, which was next to his collection of instruments. I think there was a couple of bass guitars there that he used to amuse himself with. And he noticed, I think he'd once offered free fishing tickets to anglers, local anglers, but by the time of that visit, I think that particular time I was about 1986. He'd recently begun charging, and William was always aware that people were bunking in and fishing the well-stocked water for free. And I remember he used a walkie-talkie to dispatch someone to collect the naughty fisherman's fee, on a Hustler amphibious vehicle, of course, which it had to be. Anyway, his study was a real man cave, well before that term was first uttered, I think. And he had plenty of toys in it, and in addition to the bass guitars, I think there was a keyboard and a drum kit. I think the latter, the drum kit, was played by his son, one of his sons. I think he was also a handy musician as well, William, hence the bass guitars, really. In fact, that house, there were three firsts in my life that occurred when I first went to William's house. To this day, I've never set foot in a carpet in a home with a deeper shag pile carpet. It was so deep, it was beautiful. We had to take our shoes off, of course, and you couldn't see your feet. It was just fantastic. It was a wondrous thing, and it really was plush and really lovely. It also remains the only house that I have been to where the lady of the house banged a gong, and I mean no Mickey taking on this. It was genuine. It's the only house I've been to where someone has banged a gong to announce that luncheon was ready, and I found that I was just transfixed. It was beautiful. Remember, we made. I had to be careful, as I say, as a boy from South Norwood, sitting at a beautifully presented table. If I had soup, it usually came out of a Heinz tin that my mum had got from the local shop, and was always usually tomato in flavour. This one wasn't. I can't remember what it was. It might have been broccoli and Stilton, which worries me that I remember that. But I remember it was unbelievable. And I'm not sure how many acres William had at his disposal at the Park Farm estate, but I imagine it was well into 3 digits. And then when lunch was finished, he basically got us to follow him on foot to one of those buildings, and he had in there, I think there was a collection of quad bikes, and he said, right, he just tossed us the keys to one each and said, follow me. So off we went out into the estate, I guess into a larger outbuilding further away that had examples of most of the vehicles that he designed, which I thought was fantastic. And that, of course, was a day that he also got his helicopter out, and we hovered up not very high in the sky and took photos. We arranged Pete arranged the vehicles that were on display. There's some famous photos. In fact, Neil's got one of them here for your delectation and delight, of some shots from that very session. And again, wondrous time. It was like the best day of my life at that time, I think, almost. And I think he had I don't script these, much to your surprise. And I think he had an off-road course where we were allowed to play with those quad bikes, which was good fun. But he was always a charming host, and nothing was ever too much trouble. And indeed, it was him, I think, that suggested that we arrange and how we arranged his vehicles in front of one of the sheds. And each one had a story, and there was also some of his other stuff outside. and it did take ages to set it all up, but he was meticulous, and that's the way he has the secret of his success, really, as well as him being a genius. Yeah, we had to drive or drag the ones that weren't under their own power out and move them about. It was hilarious, really. But the sheer variety of William's stuff, it is the sheer variety of what he did. You know, from Aston, let's just mention some other non-hustler ones. There was the Aston Martin Bulldog, which he really liked, and that car's come back into get mainstream press recently. It's been restored, and the current owner, I think the original owner's son, has been sort of taking it around various exhibitions and shows, and that's a fantastic thing as well. So there was the Aston Martin Bulldog. There was he designed the Alpha style. That was, if you remember, and you were around in the scene back in the mid-80s, there was, we think body conversions are something new. They certainly aren't. There was a couple of companies, Alpha style being one of them, that offered a body conversion for the Alpha 33. And William designed one of those before sorting that project on. I think it was a very pretty thing, actually. I was a bit partial to a Sud, and I had a 33. I had two 33s over the years. I had a standard 33, and I had a sport wagon, which I really liked that car. Lagonda DBS we've mentioned. There was a thing called the Black Prince. We'll come to that in a minute. The GS Europa I've mentioned. There was the Gecko E12, which was based on a Jaguar E-Type. Jensen Healey Microdot. The TXC Tracer. That's a two-seat sports car that he had high hopes for. Real high hopes. I don't think that ever came to anything. Rover BRM we've mentioned. And there was an intriguing little design called the Pizzazz, with 4 Z's in it, which was a 205 GTI that he basically tickled with a little bit of a new front bumper, rear bumper, and a couple of other body touches on it. And that was a pretty little thing, or clever little thing. But he had a real love for functional city vehicles way before the smart car. He really liked the Auto Duo, I seem to remember. He really rated that. But yeah, there was the town. I think the first one he did of that ilk was the Towns car, as it was called in 1973, which was quickly rechristened to the Minissima. Never have been able to say that properly. Minissima. And then about in 1973, and about 3 years later, he did the Microdot, which in the latter one, the Microdot was intended to be powered by an electric motor. And even then, I remember sitting in his study and him telling Pete Coxhead very seriously, intently, that he believed that fossil fuels would be superseded one day by electric power. And he spoke passionately about it. And that was 30 odd years before the advent of what we see in our showrooms today, really, I suppose, have become mainstream. One of his personal favourites was his Jensen Healey design. He really liked that. But also, well, there was a story behind each one he did, and each one had a real deep meaning for him, I think. And the Bulldog concept was for his former paymasters at Aston Martin was one that he was fond of. And I just suddenly flashed into my adult brain that the TXC Tracer, to which I mentioned, was actually an MGB, a proposal for a latter day MGB as well, which was interesting. Based on Metro, no less. He did a couple of later Reliance as well, the SS2 and the Scimitar Sabre. Also, that was interesting. There was a pair of cars for what was intended to be a resurrection of the Railton Motor Company, another old famous name. And he designed a pair of cars for them, which were based on Jaguar XJS convertible. There was the F28 Fairmile and the F29 Claremont. If I've got photos of those, you'll see them at some stage during this video that Neil will put up. But there was always something going on. He, as I said earlier, I've said a couple of times, he didn't just do vehicles. He was far from it. He was very proud of the street furniture that he designed for a variety of councils up and down the land. in high streets and shopping arcades. He created a rowing boat that was effectively a roof section from a Tony Bell high top ice cream van of the day, and that was clever. There was I think a skidoo. There was all sorts. Then there was skip lamps. I mean, most people just think a skip lamp is a skip lamp. Not William. He came up. He spent lots of time designing what was a very fancy skip lamp. I think I think they actually went into production. They certainly replaced those horrible paraffin things that used to, well, not work and stink really. And it's a photo in that group shot of the cars. I think you'll see an example of some of those. There were public lavatories as well. One of them had a plumbed-in shower, so I'm not sure where that one went. And then he got involved in a range of clothing for his good friend David Rowan, and a couple of his another buzzwords. He had lots of buzzwords, functional clothing, and he was a keen supporter of Rowan stuff, which was functional clothing, and is still available indeed. So in case you don't know about the Rowan clothes, they were kind of interchangeable clothing, so you could unzip the trousers below the knee section and then zip on another pair or another below the knee section onto them to give you a different style or colour. Shirts and jackets that you could interchange the sleeves on, and it sounds terrible, but actually very, very functional. But let's now talk about the vehicle that really put him on our radar. So that kind of brings us to the Hustler range, the cars really that put him on our map. They were actually intended, the first one anyway, was intended as a special project for Jensen Special Vehicles that wasn't, for whatever reason, proceeded with. So William decided to do it himself under the Interstyle, as I mentioned earlier, STYL sub-brand, shall we say, of William Town's design. So let's. Oh, should also mention that prior to the National Kitcar Motor Show set up at Stoneleigh in Warwickshire, William and Elizabeth with Philby had his hands in it as well. He helped them put on a little garden party bash at Compton Venay on the Park Farm estate. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant little events. And they led directly to the National Kitcar Motor Show being set up. That was in sort of late 70s, early 80s. It ran straight into, was the first Stoneleigh 81, 82 from something like that. I'm sure there'll be someone on here that will know that for sure. Such a long time ago. But anyway, the Hustlers were really clever, full of William's angular lines that he so loved. They sure didn't excite everybody, but to dismiss them, and the people that liked them loved them, and understandably so. And under the skin, they were a work of art, which we'll talk about shortly. But I always remember I used to ring William up, and he wasn't one of these sort of designers that couldn't possibly get their hands dirty, darling, or whatever. He was often changing a gearbox or an engine or something in one of his Hustlers. But it was his engineering prowess as well as his design skill which set him apart, I think. For example, the Hustlers, if you get a chance to look under the skin of one of those and just look at the design rather than just the shape, they had a very clever upper and lower chassis frame system which kind of sandwiched the body panels, literally sort of clamped them in place. But the upper sections carried the glass sliding doors, most had sliding doors, windscreen and tailgate, while the lower frame enabled literally, this is the clever bit, any engine, although he specified what the preferred engine choice, and donor of course, but the customer could literally fit any engine in any configuration, which kind of encapsulates the genius of the man, I think. And again, one more of his buzzwords, he called it pick and mix, and I think that was quite a good way to describe it really. But let's quickly run through the various Hustlers, and there's a lot of them, so I'll try not to dwell too long, because I realise we really want a 30-odd minute video as an ideal time. This one may run over slightly, so forgive me. But anyway, Hustler 4, 1979, that appeared. Did about 200 of them. That was the one that was the original concept design. That was the original design for Jensen Special Vehicles in 78. Apparently they couldn't afford to productionise it, was the reason. So William did it himself. and it actually, one of his hustlers led the parade at that at the first ever NEC motor show, I think, which was quite an interesting thing. Simple yet effective trademark towns. Here comes two more buzzwords. Razor edge styling. Based on Mini, that one. Did about 200 of them, I think. It was available for about 10 years too. Hobo came along in 1980, and he made one of those, surprisingly. That was a very Spartan type pickup style hustler, based on Mini again. But it was very basic, and I thought he would have done more of them. Maybe nowadays he probably would. Hustler in wood. Now that one, there used to be a beautiful one of that. It used to sit on the banking by the main sort of show field at Stoneleigh. And if you went to Stoneleigh, you undoubtedly be familiar with it. And lovely old fella. 70 of them were made. Came out in 1980. And it again showed his innovation, really. It made out of wood. It featured a marine ply. It was a marine ply monocoque, actually, with double glazing spec extruded aluminium frames around the edge. That actual wooden, I think I should really give the product, the wooden element, its full credit, really. It was actually a product called Aquaply, manufactured by a Gloucestershire-based company called Mallinson Denny (Lydney Limited). Don't know if they still survive, but what I was saying about liking detail, there you go. Not many magazines or whatever would be able to tell you that. If people called it Hustler Wooden or Wooden Hustler, he would automatically, instinctively correct them. He liked it called Hustler in Wood. If you called it a Hustler Wooden, he would correct you. But that's kind of that, really. Some, you hear people saying, "Oh, if in fact if you've had one and you've driven one, I bet you've heard the people call it a greenhouse and, oh, can you grow tomatoes in that, mate?" I'd say 70 people didn't care and they ordered one, and good for them for that. Hustler 6 came along in 1981. He liked a six-wheeler, did William. In fact, most of the subsequent array of Hustlers could actually be ordered with the extra axle if you so wished. There were specific six-wheelers, but you could have, if you wanted a six-wheeled Sprint, for example, you could have one. It was similar in concept and mechanical base to the Hustler 4, but it had that second mini rear subframe to house the second axle, or the second rear axle. You could actually carry 6 people in one. And a healthy payload. He always thought of farm use and agricultural use, did William. I think it was because of where he was based, and he could see their potential use for farm and agricultural purposes, really. The rear occupants, incidentally, sat 2 abreast sideways, facing each other, a la Land Rover, I suppose. Hustler Sprint was again a singular Hustler, 1981. This one was a sporty one, as he called it. He liked it, and I think he was even, I do recall him describing it as a mini Audi UR Quattro. He was so into it and rated it so highly. That had it was notable for a bank of 6 concealed headlights, which were, and here comes some more detail for you, sourced from Mitsubishi Sapporo. Or yeah, several Mitsubishi Sapporos to give you 6 headlights. But anyway, there you go. The rest of the mechanicals were again standard Mini, really, which is what he really liked. Followed the Sport. That was even more sportier. It did away with the slide. That one did away with the trademark sliding flat glass panels and was a 2-seater. But again, nobody was inspired enough to order one, really. Hellcat came along in 1982. Just over 50 of those. That was a successor to the singular Hobo. Even more basic, which probably was why it sold in bigger numbers. Hit the spot. For whatever reason, the Hellcat did catch on, or to the extent of 50. I think it was 54. Hustler Huntsman, there was a couple of those made. 1983 that appeared. That's an alternative to his mini-based Hustlers. William came up with an Austin 1100, Morris 1300, or even Metro based Hustler called the Huntsman. Had more of a purposeful stance during no small part to the larger wheels, I guess. Didn't prove popular though. Soon superseded by what came next. We're talking about the Force 4 or the Force 6 in 1984. 4 of those in total. That was, as I say, the direct replacement for the short-lived Huntsman. And again, he deleted the flat glass panels for that. and you could have conventional doors and wind up windows. But I do remember those doors were massively heavy, and in fact I told a lie there. The windows didn't open, but the doors were really heavy and you couldn't open the windows. I think that probably was off-putting for several people perhaps, but you had your alternative hustlers to choose from. Then came the herdsman. That's an interesting one. That was the one that really was targeted at farm use, and in fact he used one all the time on the Park Farm estate. Designed to tackle all terrains. Upper frame on used the upper frame actually section of a Hellcat, but bespoke below. Didn't really catch on. Williams was very proud of it though, and as I say, he used it all the time around his estate. There was a singular amphibian, mainly used for collecting fishing fees on the Compton Vernay Lake. He actually went to Crayford Engineering, who collaborated with him on that one, based on an 8-wheel all-terrain vehicle. Skillfully, they adapted a Hustler 4-body. Yeah, it was a Hustler 4-body. And you could drive it on land and of course on water, and Williams tested the demonstrator regularly on his own lake. Harlequin I always thought was quite a pretty one. That was singular. 1985, same as a Force 4, but had more of an upright type grille and revised styling. And then I think comes my personal favourite, and I know it's a favourite of lots of other people too. The Highlander. That was the Jaguar XJ based limousine version of the Hustler, and it was aimed squarely at the Range Rover customer. And I think today I'm probably right in saying it's the most sought after of all the Hustler models. I think Williams demonstrator had a XJ12 base, I think, and that the 12-cylinder engine, and the chassis had to be beefed up because obviously have you tried lifting the Jag diff? It's an XJ6 diff. It's colossal. And it was 5 meters long. I think it was a huge brute, but something beautiful. I don't think we recognised or realised how good that was at the time it was around. Really, I think the Highlander really stacks up even now. Really, certainly well appointed. It had I remember it had a space age, typical William, Clarion stereo system mounted in the transmission tunnel, and one of his Lagonda style LCD dashpots, which I thought was quite good. Did a bit about 8 of those. Should have done much more than that, I think. Much more. And then came the Holiday, the Hustler Holiday, 1986, was probably, I think, definitely the last Hustler. That was probably the most radical looking. Had big flat glass panels, massive windscreen, and again you could use Mini Metro, Austin 1100, Morris 1300. I think he was a Maestro maybe. Standard version of that had 6 wheels, but although you could order a 4-wheeler. A quick other Hustler related stuff really. There was the Rainbow, I think I've mentioned that. There was the Amphib, I've mentioned that. There was, he used to produce a lovely camping set to go with whichever Hustler model you had. That was beautiful, I thought. And it was typically functional William really. I'm not sure how many customers ordered them, but I think it was the ultimate accessory for your Hustler, I think. There was the golf buggy. Yeah, there was a Hustler golf buggy. Did a couple of those, I think. And I think that brings it up to date, really. Quick mention of the Black Prince. Now, that was a car. That was another old English brand, much like Railton, that he got involved with. Black Prince went back, I think, 1919, just after the First World War. All of his designs were innovative, but some were just plain intriguing. That I think dates back to 1984, and he was commissioned to design a new Black Prince model. The original company was based in County Durham, and they produced a little air-cooled cycle car that had a plywood body clad in vinyl. But for his born-again version, William followed that same build structure, but used GRP for the wings. And a Reliant Kitten as donor, along with its dual-like 750cc aluminium engine. Never really grabbed my attention, that one, but and I don't think it ever came to anything really. I do recall the prototype appeared for sale at Stoney a few years back, out of the blue, which intrigued a lot of people. There's lots of people really respected and admired William, and as they should have done, really. Customers seem to love him too. Some of those, he believed not only in city cars, but he believed in enabling less able-bodied people to get around in vehicles and enjoy their motoring, and so therefore he was well into that, like the Microdot and Mini and some of those, I think some of those Hustler models could be converted for wheelchair use, which I think was brilliant, quite successfully too. And I always remember, I've got a photo, I think Neil would have used it here, a lovely, very happy looking Irish chap with his old Renault estate, who'd driven all the way over to Warwickshire to collect his Hustler kit. And as you can see, it's lashed to the Renault for its journey home with what looks like rope, which I thought was fantastic. Always love to know whether he got that home or not. I think he came from somewhere near Limerick, according to that signpost just above him, but marvellous. And that was kind of typical. He was all things to all people, really, and his customers loved him. And if you got that Hustler concept, you really got it. And yeah, much miss William. He died sadly of cancer in crikey, 1993, 31 years ago. As I record, see how I go dating my videos. That means this is 2024 when I'm recording this. So if you're hearing it in 2027, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, he died in 1993 and he says it's 31 years ago. Oh, his maths are out. That's why I've got to be careful of that, really.
If names win prizes, then Whitby Warrior has to be high amongst them. Here's the story of that particular car. If the Mini Moke planted the idea, and the Scamp was to be the kit form pioneer in the mini utilitarian department, then you could certainly say that each of the utilitarian mini-based kit cars that were to follow, each found their own niche, or aimed to find their own niche. And in the case of the Whitby Warrior, I think it's safe to say that it leaned more towards the utilitarian small business use rather than the leisure industry. It was a no-nonsense, straightforward, tough, dependable and basic design, and none the worse for that. The Whitby Warrior kit car was developed by Brian Whitby Engineering at Haslington, Crewe in the early 1980s, a time which saw a boom in the kit car industry. This was caused by various factors, but the biggest one seemed to be the retreat by major manufacturers, and in particular British Leyland, from any kind of adventurous design. They retreated back into the basic saloons, estates, vans, but sports cars, fun cars, these were something that they worried that they wouldn't be able to sell. They thought the market was dead. What in fact happened was the kit car industry filled those niches, and after the demise of the Moke in 1968, on UK shores at least, the kit car industry was very quick to step in with its own variations. And in the 80s, boom in sales meant a boom in different varieties of vehicle. And the Whitby Warrior was definitely one of the ones that stood out amongst the crowd. Mechanically, the Whitby Warrior didn't vary very much from the basic formula. It was based on the Austin Mini. It utilised the donor car using the subframes front and rear, and a tough, dependable, no-nonsense metal body. The chassis itself was pretty basic, being a sturdy ladder frame, but the body was made of sheet steel, which formed a sort of semi-monocoque, creating the strength of the vehicle. One unusual feature of the design was that there was a two-section roof that could be clipped and bolted on, and easily removable doors, allowing for conversion into a pickup with half doors if required. I remember the magazine features of the day, which recognised it as a very practical, useful utility vehicle. Nothing exciting, nothing out of the ordinary. But it did strike a chord with a small group of kit enthusiasts. In fact, it said that 120 Whitby Warriors found homes. How many actually made it onto the road, I couldn't tell you. But it does say something for the basic idea of the utilitarian mini-based car, that it did find so many ready customers. One other notable thing to say about the Whitby Warrior was that one of the kits is on display at the Whitby Morrison Museum. The basic design of the car lent itself to low volume production, and there was efforts to find markets outside the UK where local high import taxes encouraged local assembly and local production. But it appears all these efforts were unsuccessful, and like so many of the 1980s utility cars of its ilk, the arrival of SVA, single vehicle approval, and the IVA variant that followed basically saw an end to production. The sharp edges and angular style, whilst attractive in itself, did not pass the legislation, and serious modification would have been required for the car to carry on. So there we go, 120 cars and another utilitarian car, and I think we can agree this was definitely on the utilitarian side of utilitarian rather than the fun toy car, if you like, that the other extreme of the Moke customers might have leaned towards. And here's another exponent of the mini utility theme. As if to prove that looks are not the only part of the recipe that's important for a successful product, you have to look at the Scout. It's been relaunched several times and unsuccessful in each. It was first presented by Import Export of Spalding in Lincolnshire in 1983 and produced until 1985. It was then made by AEM in 1987, and after the demise of that company, the design was taken up by the Sun Motor Company of Solihull from 1990 to 1991. And yet none of these enterprises proved successful. The AEM version, the Automotive Engineering and Manufacturing Company, was taking the vehicle to Wales to produce it there. So that in itself gave the car, if you like, a focal point for an interest. The fact that a lot of support would have been gained by making it in Wales. But it was a mini Moke lookalike, and it really did look extremely similar to the Moke. It had a zinc coated bodywork and was a totally different way of building the monocoque body. It was made for 1 year by AEM in 1987 in Merthyr Tydfil, South Wales. It used the usual mini engine transmission and front subframe and hydrogas suspension. It was advertised with a soft top or a glazed hard top and could be purchased as a basic kit, fully built, or as a knockdown unit with all major components ready for assembly. So you can't say that they didn't do everything to make it work. There was no reason why on the kit and the offering why this should be an unsuccessful product. There was even a rare six-wheeled version called the Comanchero. It was produced for a hotel chain in the Middle East. And yet it slipped into obscurity. Very much similar in looks and in premise to the Anderson Cub, and yet whereas one went on to great success and longevity, the other disappeared after 3 attempts without a trace. Such is the fickle nature of the British buying public, well, the world buying public, but definitely one of the ones that got away. I always found the AEM Scout to be an attractive proposition, and I could understand why people would want one. So it's one of those strange things that flip of a coin, one product takes off and one is quiet. Certainly the advertising wasn't as strong with the AEM Scout as it was with the Cub. And I think there lies probably the reality of the situation. Proper marketing is one of the things that a lot of the kit car industry suffered badly with, where good engineers and designers didn't necessarily have the marketing skills to back that engineering prowess up. So, yeah, one that slipped away, but definitely a worthy mention in the annals of the utility mini-based kits. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up. That'll tell people like us that there's something here that they'll enjoy. Whilst you're at it, click on the bell, and when the icon drops down, click on all, and then you'll be told when more videos are coming. In the meantime, why don't you check out this?